Picture the Netherlands right in the middle of the summer recess. The political epicenter in The Hague is basically a ghost town.
Yeah, completely empty.
Right. The halls of parliament are quiet, the politicians are all off on vacation, and there is this prevailing illusion that the entire country has just hit the pause button, like everything seems quiet on the surface.
But that quiet is completely deceptive, you know, because beneath the surface, the pressure cooker of socioeconomic tension is absolutely still on.
Oh, definitely.
And the clock is ticking down to some very harsh realities for the incoming government.
That contrast, the serene summer break versus the boiling pressure underneath, is exactly where our deep dive takes us today. We are exploring the current political and economic landscape of the Netherlands.
Right, by examining a recent, highly revealing interview with the Socialist Party, or SP leader Jimmy Dijk.
Exactly. We're pulling this from the WNL YouTube program, specifically the Sven Op1 Zoomer Edity. We are going to unpack his perspectives on, well, everything from the cost of living crisis and government scandals to how the opposition is strategizing and even those massive agricultural protests.
It is a massive scope. I mean, we are looking at a worldview that attempts to connect the price of your daily groceries to the fundamental trust we place in government institutions.
It really is. But before we really get into the weeds, I want to address you, our listener, directly. We're diving straight into some highly charged political divides today.
Yeah, heavy stuff.
We're talking left-wing strategies, right-wing policies, massive strikes, and heavy economic critiques. So just a quick reminder that we aren't picking sides here.
Not at all.
We're just your tour guides navigating Jimmy Dyk's arguments. We aren't endorsing or condemning these viewpoints. Our sole mission is to break down the ideas in this original interview so you can see the whole political board clearly.
Which is a vital perspective to hold, because to truly understand a political ecosystem as complex as the Dutch one, you have to look at the mechanics of the arguments objectively, no matter where they fall on the ideological spectrum.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because Jimmy Dijk is doing something highly unusual for a national politician in July.
He's not on a beach.
No, he is definitely not sitting on a beach in Southern Europe. He is actively touring the country with a campaign called Maak Nederland Betaalbaar, which means make the Netherlands affordable. He's out on the streets engaging with people while the rest of the political class is resting.
The timing of this summer tour is entirely strategic, though. I mean, the current Dutch minority cabinet might be on recess, but hovering right over them like this massive storm cloud are the incredibly difficult 2027 budget negotiations.
Those are coming up fast.
And perhaps even more pressing, they have to negotiate a broad social agreement with the labor unions. Dijk is out there setting the narrative before Parliament even reconvenes. He wants to define the battlefield.
And the narrative he is setting on the streets goes straight to the economic squeeze on ordinary people. In fact, the interview dives into an essay he recently wrote titled Neoliberalism in a New Jas, so neoliberalism in a new jacket.
Catchy title.
Yeah. And his core argument is that the government is essentially giving out tax breaks and gifts to massive corporations while simultaneously levying heavy usage taxes on everyday citizens. We are talking about VAT on groceries, VAT on energy, and heavy duties on fuel.
To understand his critique, we have to look at the underlying mechanics of taxation. Dijk's argument relies on the disproportionate impact of these specific types of usage taxes.
Right.
He points out that taxing consumption hits lower and middle-income earners 5 to 6 times harder proportionally than it hits top earners.
He actually used a great phrase in the interview. He said, you can only fill a shopping cart once.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to try an analogy here to make this disparity really clear for anyone who hasn't thought about regressive taxes lately. Imagine if a grocery store didn't charge for the individual food items, but instead just charged a flat €50 entry fee at the door for everyone, regardless of who you are.
Okay, I follow.
For a CEO making millions, that €50 is literal pocket change. They wouldn't even blink. But for a minimum wage worker, that exact same €50 fee might completely bankrupt them for the week.
It's devastating, yeah.
That's essentially how Dijk views these usage taxes. It taxes the basic requirement of staying alive.
That is precisely the mechanism he is criticizing. It's the fundamental difference between taxing accumulated wealth versus taxing mere existence.
Yeah.
You know, the daily requirements of living, eating, and heating a home.
Right.
Dijk even points across the channel to the UK, noting that their new prime minister immediately cut the VAT on energy to give people breathing room. Yeah. He uses that to show that alternative approaches are entirely possible. They're just political choices that the current Dutch cabinet refuses to make.
I have to push back here, though, based on the interview itself. The host of the WNL program brought up a very standard counter-argument, specifically regarding fuel duties. Hasn't the cabinet and bodies like the Central Planning Bureau argued that lowering fuel duties actually benefits wealthy people the most?
Well, yes, they have.
Because the logic being that wealthy people own more cars, buy bigger cars, and drive longer distances, doesn't that directly contradict Dyk's point that fuel taxes hurt the poor the most?
What's fascinating here is how Dijk refutes that exact premise by critiquing the methodology of the Central Planning Bureau itself.
Let's clarify that for a second. The Central Planning Bureau, the CPB, they are the official macroeconomic watchdog in the Netherlands, right?
Yes, exactly.
Their economic models basically dictate what the government can and cannot afford to do.
Precisely. They are the ultimate mathematical authority in The Hague. But Dijk points out a flaw in how they present their data to politicians. He notes that the CPB tends to look at absolute euros rather than the percentage of a household's income.
Well,
Yes, in absolute euros, a wealthy person might save more money if gas taxes drop simply because they buy more gas. But Dijk argues that politics shouldn't be looking at absolute euros. It should look at the percentage of a family's budget.
because the impact is different.
Right. If gas taxes eat up 15% of a lower-income family's monthly budget, but only 1% of a wealthy family's budget, then the tax is inherently regressive. He wants to flip the script. He argues you should lower those daily usage taxes and shift the burden to wealth and corporate profits.
Which brings up an interesting moment regarding Minister Hans Veilbrief. Veilbrief recently stated that a higher wealth tax is no longer a taboo in The Hague. Dijk seems cautiously optimistic about that phrasing, but remains highly skeptical that the VVD, specifically mentioning Eelco Heinen, would ever actually allow a meaningful wealth tax to pass.
Dijk's broader critique in that Neoliberalism in a New Jacket essay goes far beyond just tweaking tax rates, though. He is arguing that the current economic system isn't even a true free market anymore.
How so?
He points out that if you look at essential sectors like banking, healthcare, energy, public transit, they are completely dominated by just 2 or 3 massive companies.
Wow, yeah.
Dijk asserts that even a staunch, traditional liberal shouldn't look at a landscape dominated by a 3-company oligopoly and call it a healthy, competitive free market. He argues the government has become totally subservient to these monopolies.
So if Dijk believes the government's economic policies show a fundamental disconnect with working-class realities, it forces us to look at how the government treats those citizens when things actually go wrong.
And they have gone terribly wrong.
Right, and there is no greater example of that breakdown in trust than the Toesleg affair, the childcare benefits scandal.
It remains a deeply traumatic failure of the state.
Yeah.
I mean, thousands of parents were falsely accused of fraud by the tax authorities, ordered to pay back tens of thousands of euros they didn't have, and driven into absolute financial and personal ruin.
It's awful. The interview references a recent article in the Volkskrant newspaper about the Stichting Gelijkwaardig Herstel, the Foundation for Equal Recovery. This was founded by Princess Laurentienne to help victims bypass the gridlocked government system.
Right, to speed things up.
But the article revealed this foundation is currently costing more money than budgeted due to very high costs for damage analysts, and it's helping fewer victims than initially expected. Now, you would normally expect an opposition leader laser-focused on public funds to criticize this kind of inefficiency, but Dijk vehemently defends the foundation.
He defends it because he views the foundation's methodology in stark contrast to the government's methodology. He argues that the government's initial approach to these citizens was built on a bucket of distrust.
A bucket of distrust.
Yeah, the state assumed fraud from the outset and automated the punishment. Conversely, he knows this foundation operates purely on trust. They actually sit down, have real human conversations with the victims, and take the time to listen to their trauma to assess the damage.
Treating them like actual people?
Exactly. For Dijk, if it costs more money in analyst hours to finally pull these people out of a decade of state-sponsored misery, then so be it. Human dignity is worth the hourly rate.
But the scale of the government's initial failure just keeps growing. In the interview, they bring up a staggering recent revelation. Here's where it gets really interesting. A massive data vault containing 64 million files, including highly sensitive victim data, was completely withheld from the parliamentary inquiry investigating the scandal.
Oh, the sheer volume of that hidden information is almost impossible to comprehend.
I am genuinely struggling with the logistics of this. Like, how does a government department physically or digitally hide 64 million files from a formal parliamentary inquiry? It sounds like a conspiracy movie.
It isn't a shadowy conspiracy with a single villain, though. It's actually much worse. It is the result of deeply ingrained bureaucratic self-preservation.
What do you mean?
You have to understand how these ministries operate. Information is heavily siloed. When a parliamentary inquiry asks for documents, the request filters down through layers of middle management. Each layer has a vested interest in minimizing their own exposure to blame.
So they just hide it.
Well, they interpret the request as narrowly as legally possible. They create parallel internal systems or data vaults where working documents are kept separate from official correspondence. Over years, this culture of information hiding becomes institutionalized. It is cover-your-ass politics on an industrial scale, resulting in 64 million files sitting in a digital blind spot.
Wow. But regarding political strategy, the state secretary currently overseeing this mess is Sandra Pullman. And she is actually a former whistleblower herself from within the ministry.
Yes, she is.
With the department hiding 64 million files under her watch, you would absolutely expect a fiery socialist opposition leader to demand her immediate resignation on live television. But Dijk refuses to file a motion of no confidence against her. He explicitly says he won't do it. Why on earth would he show that kind of restraint when the failure is that massive?
This is where we see Dyk's deep pragmatism. He notes in the interview that he has only ever filed 2 motions of no confidence in his entire political career. For Dijk, this isn't about scoring theatrical political points. Firing Sandra Pullman today does not get a single victim their compensation any faster tomorrow.
He actually says he prefers what he calls a Stevig debate, so a tough, rigorous debate rather than a symbolic firing.
Because Dijk is pointing at that exact systemic rot we just discussed. He knows that the bureaucracy is so entrenched in this defensive posture that even when you put a former whistleblower in charge of the department, she is effectively neutralized by the machinery of the ministry itself. Changing the hood ornament doesn't fix a broken engine. Firing her just resets the clock while the new minister gets up to speed, delaying justice for the victims even further.
So if changing individual ministers won't fix these systemic issues and the bureaucracy is that stubborn, how exactly does Dijk plan to force a change in government policy? He certainly can't do it alone from the opposition benches.
No, he can't.
This brings us to his strategy of organizing massive pushback, specifically by uniting the political opposition and, crucially, the labor unions.
The unions are the muscle in this strategy. The interview highlights that FNV union leader Hans Speckmann has announced major strike for the first 2 weeks of September. This includes a highly disruptive 24-hour national train strike.
Wow.
They're striking specifically to protest proposed government cuts to Social Security.
If you're relying on that train to get to work or drop your kids off in the first minute of September, Dyk's strategy isn't just political theory anymore. It's going to directly impact your commute. He is unconditionally backing these strikes.
Yeah.
He argues that there is absolutely no justification for cutting the WW, which is unemployment, or the WIA, the disability benefits.
Right.
His rationale is that those pots of money are currently full.
That is a crucial distinction.
Yeah.
He wants to reframe how people view these funds. They aren't government handouts funded by general taxation. They are full of premiums that were paid directly by the workers themselves out of every paycheck. It's deferred wages.
Dijk issues a very stark, explicit warning to other left-wing parties. He specifically targets Groenling's PVDA and to the unions themselves. His message is, do not compromise with this minority cabinet. Do not offer them a lifeline.
Yeah, he was very firm on that.
He argues that participating in what he calls the demolition, the fabric of the welfare state, is not being constructive. It is being complicit.
He backs that up with international examples, too. He points to the UK, to France, to Germany, arguing that whenever traditional social democratic parties try to be responsible and participate in neoliberal cuts to balance a budget, they completely lose the trust of the working class. The voters abandon them.
He really wants a united front. He even points to his own SP colleague, Sarah Dobby, who recently managed to successfully organize a parliamentary majority to block cuts to elderly care.
Right, as an example.
Yeah, he uses that as proof that if the opposition stays totally united, they can physically stop this cabinet from executing its agenda.
It's a strategy of total blockade.
I have to ask about the danger of this uncompromising stance, though. If the unions refuse to yield a single inch on Social Security and the government refuses to back down on budget cuts, aren't they risking total gridlock in the country? I mean, a 24-hour train strike paralyzes everything. If neither side blinks, aren't they just holding the public hostage?
It really comes down to leverage. For Dijk, that rigid stance, that threat of total gridlock, is a necessary feature of his strategy, not a bug. Think of a minority cabinet, like a car driving on a very narrow bridge with no guardrails.
Okay.
They don't have a guaranteed majority to pass laws, so they are incredibly vulnerable to crosswinds. By applying massive, unrelenting external pressure through nationwide strikes shutting down transit and combining that with ironclad internal pressure from a united opposition blocking legislation in Parliament, they're trying to blow the car off the bridge.
They leave the cabinet with no way out.
Exactly. The goal is to force the government to completely abandon Social Security cuts and force them to look for alternative funding. And in Dyk's view, that alternative funding should be taxing the wealthy. The gridlock is the weapon to force that pivot.
There's a funny little personal dynamic in all of this union talk, actually. The WNL host points out that the union leader, Hans Speckmann, recently decided to join the PVDA party instead of Dyk's SP. You'd think that would sting a bit.
Yeah, you would think.
But Dyke is completely unbothered. He laughs it off and humorously points out that while Speckmann joined the PVDA, Speckmann's wife actually joined the SP.
It shows he isn't getting bogged down in petty party rivalries or bruised egos. He's focused on the macro movement of the working class, regardless of which specific membership card a union leader carries in their wallet.
Speaking of the working class, Dyke's definition of that term seems to be expanding in ways that might surprise people. He's not just focused on urban train conductors or factory workers. He is actively extending his reach into rural demographics and forming some highly controversial local alliances.
This is where we see his attempt to bridge the urban-rural divide. The interview brings up the upcoming farmer protests. Now, typically, in recent political discourse, left-wing environmentalism has clashed heavily with the agricultural sector over nitrogen emissions.
Very heavily.
But Dijk actively supports these upcoming farmer protests.
He completely reframes the narrative around farmers. He doesn't paint them as these environmental villains destroying the local ecosystem. He frames farmers as victims of a rigged system. He says they are entirely trapped in a vicious cycle dictated by politics, merciless global markets, giant supermarket monopolies, and the banks.
He focuses heavily on the historical political push for skaalvergroting, which means scale enlargement. For decades, the political and economic message to Dutch farmers from The Hague was essentially get big or get out.
Whoa.
To survive on the ruthless global market, farmers were forced by government policy to take on massive debt from the banks to buy more land, build bigger barns, and innovate. Dijk points out this relentless pressure led to the loss of 1 in 6 farms.
It's a huge loss.
Yeah. He views them not as wealthy capitalist landowners, but as indebted workers completely beholden to the banks that hold their mortgages and the supermarkets that dictate their prices.
So what does this all mean when the rubber meets the road in local politics? Because this focus on uniting the working class above all else leads to a massive controversy in a municipality called Pekela. In Pekela, an SP provincial council member, Erik van Kathoven, just quit. He walked away after 12 years of service.
Yeah, that was a big deal.
Why? Because the local SP branch formed a governing coalition with former members of the PVV, the far-right Party for Freedom.
It is a political earthquake on a local level, and it tests the absolute limits of Dijk's philosophy.
I mean, we really have to look at the glaring contradiction here. How does a staunch, historically left-wing socialist party reconcile teaming up with former members of the far-right PVV? It seems like a massive betrayal of their core values. Is ideology just taking a back seat to getting things done?
This is perhaps the most revealing moment of the interview regarding Dijk's leadership. He vehemently defends the coalition in Pekela. To understand this, you have to understand how deeply decoupled local Dutch politics can be from national party platforms.
Right.
Dijk lays out the specifics. These local politicians split from the national PVV, and importantly, they publicly distance themselves from the PVV's exclusionary national ideology. But Dijk focuses entirely on their local actions. This specific local coalition in Pekela successfully housed 75 to 100 refugees from the drastically overcrowded Terrapel Asylum Center.
Which is a huge deal because Pekela is one of the poorest municipalities in the country, and they stepped up to take in refugees when incredibly wealthy municipalities outright refused to help.
Exactly. Dijk points out that this local coalition, despite their former right-wing labels, did more for human dignity than many rich, supposedly progressive towns. He outlines the SP's national red lines. They will absolutely not work with any party that excludes people based on their origin or any party that seeks to sow division within the working class.
That makes sense.
But if a local group meets those conditions, even if they used to fly a far-right banner, Dijk allows for local flexibility. He cares about housing the refugees, not the past political affiliations of the town councilors who voted to house them.
It's incredible pragmatism. He's looking purely at the reality on the ground. Dijk has actually lost 3 elections in his 2.5 years as party leader, but he doesn't seem deterred by that at all.
No, not at all.
He is entirely focused on rebuilding the party's foundation from the ground up, heavily targeting the upcoming provincial elections with this exact brand of pragmatic, working-class unification.
He's playing a very long game.
Yeah.
He's trying to completely redefine the political axis in the Netherlands. He doesn't want the fight to be the traditional left versus right on cultural issues. He wants the fight to be the united working class, meaning urban train conductors and rural indebted farmers alike, standing together against what he sees as entrenched neoliberal economic structures.
To summarize the major takeaways from our deep dive today into Jimmy Dyk's WNL interview, we're looking at a political vision that aggressively critiques the taxation system for punishing basic daily usage while rewarding corporate wealth. We see a leader who demands pragmatic, trust-based solutions for state scandals rather than participating in the theater of symbolic firings. We see a strategy of uncompromising opposition relying on union muscle and the threat of gridlock to block welfare cuts.
Yep.
And finally, we see a fascinating attempt to unite both indebted rural farmers and urban workers under a single banner of shared economic anxiety.
It is a cohesive, if highly challenging, worldview. It attempts to diagnose the root causes of the anxiety pulsing through Dutch society right now, offering a radically different path forward than the current cabinet.
For you, our listener, the relevance of this is absolutely everywhere. The next time you find your commute delayed by a train strike in early September, or you see tractors blocking a highway on the evening news, or you simply wince at the total on your receipt at the grocery store, you aren't just experiencing isolated, annoying events. You are watching this exact, massive ideological battle over the future of the economy playing out in real time.
It leaves us with a fascinating final thought to mull over, building on that intense controversy we discussed in Pequila. As national politics becomes increasingly paralyzed by fierce polarization, gridlock, and rigid ideological labels, could the actual future of effective governance lie in these hyper-local, radically pragmatic alliances?
That's a great point.
If a local socialist and a former right-wing populist can agree to house refugees and tackle local poverty by completely discarding their national party labels, it makes you wonder, is the traditional political compass we all rely on completely broken, or is it just finally adapting to reality?
A brilliant question to leave off on, because whether you are looking at surprising local coalitions or the massive national budget looming in the fall, it is abundantly clear that the quiet of this summer recess is just an illusion. The pressure cooker is boiling, and the real fight is just getting started.